Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, making a knife with simple hand tools. So today I'll be doing one of my favorite types of video where I'll be making a knife using simple hand tools. Now the knife that I'm going to be making is a prototype for a concealable, combative / EDC type of knife. Now if the design pans out, I may turn this into a production knife for my Tactics Armory line, but for now it's just a prototype. I've prepared a design to test out here, which I'll transfer onto steel using this little template. I'm going to be using precision ground 01 steel, an oil hardening steel that you can buy from a wide variety of industrial suppliers like Grainger and MSC. Sometimes it's just referred to as oil hardening tool steel. Now, precision ground means that the scale, which forms during manufacturing, has been ground off so that the blank is very flat and very precisely dimensioned. As you can see, in the annealed state that you buy it, you can rip right through it with a hacksaw. Next, I'll drill holes in the handle. I always prefer to drill them right off the bat when the rectangular blank will fit easily into a vise. In order to keep the holes perpendicular to the blank, I'm using a homemade drill guide. You don't have to go to this trouble, but the more square your holes are to the steel, the better everything will come out in the end. This is the only power tool I'll use today, unless you consider a kitchen oven to be a power tool. In some videos, I've used a hand-operated brace and bit just to show that you can do this literally without any power tools at all. But let's face it, most people have a power drill. Once those holes are drilled, I'll start the hardest part of this job, which is profiling the blade. This is not so much a skill job as a persistence job. I'll be doing it with these files. Now it might seem crazy to think you can remove all of this steel by hand, but you'll be amazed at how quickly a file will go. Basically, I just start with the corners and start grinding down to the lines I've drawn. I won't lie to you though, it's hard work, but trust me, it is doable. Just a quick note, if you're interested in this project and want a little bit more detail on the dimensions, as always, plans for my knife builds are available to all my supporters on this channel on my Patreon page. Link in the cards and description. A general rule in all metalworking is if you can saw it before grinding, milling, or filing, go for it. So with that in mind, I'll crunch off as much of the excess as I can with a hacksaw. Now, back to filing. More hacksaw. And more filing. More hacksaw. Now, at this point, I'm going to turn to round files. Half rounds are good too for an application like this, but mine fell behind the cabinet a while back and I haven't bothered crawling onto the floor to get it. There's a lot you can do with a file. Basically, you can move your lines side to side by varying the pressure you use, and by experimenting with the amount of pressure, which part of the file you use, moving it around, drawing different directions, and so on, you'll find that you can be pretty darn precise with them and accomplish a lot of detailed work. Done, finally. So let's move on to the handle. In my case, I'm using G10, which is a glass fiber laminate. I don't necessarily recommend this for a home project because it produces itchy, nasty dust. I'd recommend using regular micarta, which you can find from online knife making supply places, or wood. But I just happen to have this scrap piece to use, so that's the route that I'm going. Next, holes. The key point here is that they have to line up dead perfect with the holes in the steel. If they don't, the pins that you want to run through here to hold everything together won't fit. So here's the process that I use. First, I clamp it in my vise. Then I clamp the steel to the handle material, leaving plenty of extra at the front for reasons we'll see in a bit. Now, drill that first hole. Guide or no guide, up to you. Then I'll drive a 1/4-inch locator pin into the hole. This is critical. If you just clamp and drill both holes at the same time, it's amazingly easy for the pressure of the drill to kind of jog that blank out of alignment. Then the holes don't line up and you're back to square one. You got to do it all over again. Now, flip it over. You don't have to use the locator pin for that first hole, but the closer that you've cut your handle material to the blade shape, the more you want to constrain everything from skating around on you. Again, jump the locator pin to the other hole once you drill that first hole. Then drill the final hole. Before we do anything else, we'll profile the front faces of the handle scales. This is an easy step to forget, but the deal here is that you won't be able to access this part of the scales once you attach them to the blade. So whatever profile or shape that you want to give them, you better do it now. More filing. Again, G10 is suboptimal here because that glass will chew up your tools pretty quickly. You can also use sandpaper. Heavy grit sandpaper will munch through laminates pretty quickly. Now it's time for the most high skill part of the process, beveling. The bevels are the slopey, cutty part of the knife, the thing that changes this from a crappy crowbar to a good knife. The idea is that the line of your bevel should run dead parallel to the cutting edge of the knife. You're going to file these, but not quite yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark the center of the bar to give a guide for how far down I need to file each bevel. I'm using a nice little center marker that I got from the guys at Stainless Steel Tool Wrap, but you can make your own or just use something like a drill bit. Set it on a flat surface and just slide the blade back and forth and it'll scribe a nice little line on there. Before I get going in earnest, I'll use this chainsaw file to file my plunge line. You don't have to do this, but it helps give you a nice smooth transition from bevel to ricasso. It's on to the filing again. So here's the theory. As long as you hold your file at the exact same angle the entire time you file, and you file evenly, moving evenly across the blade the entire time without favoring any one area, your bevels will be perfect. Easier said than done, but we're going to jump right in anyway. We're filing. We're filing. We're filing. We're filing. Then, after we get an even grind line and reach down to that center line that I scribed, we'll flip the blade over. We're filing. Okay, enough of that. Hard part over. Now it's on to hardening the blade. Everybody with an interest in knives by now has seen a zillion guys hardening blades on Forged in Fire, so I don't have to explain too much here. But the basic idea is that steel is sold in a condition known as annealed, which is comparatively soft. The microstructure of the steel now needs to be rearranged so as to make it harder. Conveniently, this can be done, at least with the right kind of steel, by heating to around 1500 Fahrenheit and then jamming it into a bucket of oil. So, let's do that. Now, you might be watching me crank up my forge and thinking, well, here's the thing that makes this impossible for me to do. Not so fast. I'll link you to a video I did many years ago where I show how you can heat treat a knife in your backyard charcoal grill. It's not that hard. I'm tapping away with a little magnet on a stick. When the steel reaches about 1425 degrees, 75 degrees below my target, the steel becomes non-magnetic. So I know that I just need to get the steel a hair hotter and we're good to go. Boom, into the oil. Will any oil do? Pretty much. Now, this is a fancy industrial quenching oil, but I often use warm peanut oil and it works just fine too. By scratching on the blade with the corner of a file, we can determine that the steel is hard, whereas that file still bites into the tang, indicating that the blade's hard and the tang's not. It's so hard, in fact, that if we drop it on the floor, it'll snap right in half like glass. So, next, it's into an oven to temper at 400 Fahrenheit for an hour, toughening it and reducing the hardness slightly. I'm using my fancy industrial heat treating oven, but the good old kitchen oven will work just fine. Now it's a nice ugly gray black, covered with mill scale and baked on oil. So we'll need to clean it up with sandpaper. In this case, I've attached a piece of wet or dry sandpaper to a machinist's block, but any nice flat surface will work. Glass, melamine, a plastic cutting board, whatever. We're back to straight up elbow grease. If you do this right, you'll get rid of every single scratch from the filing, but that's between you and your conscience. Somewhere along the way, I'll switch over to a little sanding block. This will allow me to make a nice, smooth, pretty transition from the plunge line right down the bevel to the tip. Do it right, and you'll end up with a super clean, smooth finish running from stem to stern on that knife. Once that's achieved, it's time to put on the handles. Before I get started though, I'll trim off some of the extra scales with a jeweler's saw. Now you could do this with a hacksaw or whatever, but this just happens to be a tool that'll do a pretty clean job of it. In this case, I'm using tube rivets. There are a ton of ways to do this though. I'll put a link in the cards and descriptions to a video I did last year that shows some of the many ways you can attach a handle to a knife. Basically, I'm just going to use small cut pieces of stainless steel tube. Slide them in, file down most of the excess, then flare them. I'm using an arbor press and flared dies that I made myself, but if you don't have an arbor press, you can do this with a hammer and any old piece of tapered ironmongery that'll fit in those holes and kind of squash them out. Now it's back to a combination of filing and sanding. Then back to the files again to profile the handle. Did I mention there was a lot of filing in this project? One thing to bear in mind is that the blade's going to be very hard, so keep your file away from that. The tang is fine. You can file right on down into the tang if you want to take it that far. But if you try doing that on the blade, you'll wreck your file. You want to do all that work with sandpaper. Once you get pretty close, then you're going to want to transition back to sandpaper using some kind of backing like a sanding block or whatever. You want it to be nice and firm so that it doesn't sink down into the handle material and wear that away faster than it does the steel. And the handle's complete. If you do a thicker handle than this, you might want to dome the handles. But in this case, the scales are very thin, so we're just leaving them flat per the instructions of my client. So here's the finished product. Like I said, if this turns into a production item, you'll probably see them on my Tactics Armory website in the next few months, complete with a bunch of tiny refinements, jimping, a false edge, maybe some minor changes in edge geometry, but still the basic outlines of the knife will still be there. One additional note, look, I have a weakness for using my fanciest tools in my videos. Mostly because doing these hand tool type videos is insanely time consuming. But I know sometimes this irritates viewers. They're like, well, I can't do that. I don't have a CNC machine and a lathe and all that stuff. Well, actually, most of these you can. If you apply what I show in this project, you can make nearly all the knives that I demonstrate in tons of other videos that I've done. So, by all means, check out my playlist of other knife builds and see if there's something there that you might like to try. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.